What's good, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Mist Podcast. I am your host, Arrow Mist. Today, we're going to talk about stimulation. And this is about every type of stimulation. Because we live in such a world now where stimulation is almost the backbone of keeping people subdued. And even the excess stimulation that regular based things, for instance, eating and other things like that, begin to give you. I think it's important for us to remember what happens when we are stimulating ourselves constantly, what happens whenever we don't really wake up and be conscious of what we use to stimulate ourselves and how detrimental or helpful those things can be. Because realistically, we're at a point where I think almost everyone is overstimulated to some degree. And that's what keeps many of us kind of, and that doesn't necessarily mean something bad when we talk about, people being stimulated. Stimulation, once again, can be the food that you eat, right? If you're eating food that is probably not fruit, just from understanding my study into biochemistry, botany, and understanding how food works, you're probably addicted to some part of the food that you already eat, whether it's the sugar, whether it's the pros of the meat, to the taste of it because you just like the taste. Well, that's literally only liking something for its stimulation to you and not actually liking it because of the deeper meaning and understanding behind that specific substance or item or whatever it is. And so it's just important to really reconcile how everything affects us. Now, there's obviously the stimulants that are not good. As you could say, you start getting into like hard drugs, and there's a reason why everyone has a different way that they end up stimulating themselves in their existence, and sometimes it's good for some people and sometimes it's not, right? I can say that me doing music is a stimulation for me, and it is, but it's something that is technically a healthy stimulation because of understanding what music is, how doing music positively even affects your body, and all those other things. So it's looking into your stimulants and really understanding if they're good for you, if they're bad for you, if they're detrimental, if they're progressive, and what you have going on. So, and there's a lot of times that we are just not honest about the stimulations and stimulants we have, and if those stimulants are actually productive for us, if they're doing anything for us, or what's even going on that line of it. Because most stimulations, like in today's world, are not good stimulations. And an easy example of having not good stimulations is like TikTok. It's almost too easy to say, easy, quote, easy, for somebody to be addicted to scrolling, to short form content, because it is literally a consistent stimulant. And that is what has shortened the attention span of people overall as time has gone on. And the more people that are consuming TikTok now, we're living in that world more and deeper where, like, if things are not accommodating to a deeper stimulant, then it doesn't even matter. And that's where, like, the chase of stimulation is really altering the way people are maneuvering and the way that the world is falling into different hands, because the needs of the people has changed. And since the needs of the people have changed, that means the stimulants of the people have changed. And that's why things like marijuana can now be legal, because it's at that point where really at a community point, people are so endowed in that stimulant, you don't even realize that most of the time it's not really good. Like, there's medical properties, but we're talking about recreational points. And this is from somebody that has a medical card in a medical state. Like, I could wholeheartedly comprehend that really, even for myself, marijuana is not always the best thing for me to be doing. And because it's so recreationalized, like, many of us have lost the understanding that this is still a psychedelic, it's still a psychoactive substance, and it's still doing something to your brain that takes it out of its natural state of consciousness. And I mean, you could say this is the point of why many people chase their stimulants and chase the stimulation, is so that they can walk on the valley of getting away or escaping something And I mean, that's just what it is. Like, you're a human being. We're all a human being, and we've prosed the normalization into our society that getting away from things in general via stimulants, even if they seem very non-invasive and not harmful or whatever it might be, it's, if you're not thinking, and something is going to influence you when you think as well. But if you're not thinking, then something is trying to make you think for you. Or something is trying to think for you in general. And understanding what that means by something is trying to think for me. Well, if I myself am going to, smoke weed all the time like I do, well, technically, I'm out of my natural state of stasis with my where my psyche is at, regardless, and I'm not taking back on any medicinal properties from any substance that's out there that is a stimulant. Even psilocybin is a stimulant, and a stimulant all in itself, but as per showing as a microdose and things like that, it is a very, very healthy thing for the brain. But I don't agree with taking consistent big doses, and I still to this day do not agree with taking consistent big doses, because realistically, there is not enough that you can take from a singleized trip under an eighth for it to be as worth it if you're measuring it stimulation wise and how much is lost in the translation of stimulation. And if we're comparing it at that point, then technically the stimulant is still, in a sense, something that, even if it has productive qualities, is overstimulating you to the point where the purpose behind its medicinal properties can be misinterpreted or not fully realized, which I think a lot of people don't and are not educated about. And I think that that's just the whole pros of how there's the party culture behind almost every single drug now. And that's especially for marijuana, because of how it's been recreationalized and how people are just, I'm going to smoke a bunch of weed in a day and I'm going to smoke an ounce. And I mean, it's just like, even though being high is different for every single person, you're still stimulating the fuck out of yourself. Like, pure fact, you're still stimulating yourself to all hell. And that is then also having a spiritual and a real effect on you. Now, can people still function on it and all that other kind of stuff? Like, absolutely. Like, I'm not discrediting marijuana. Once again, obviously, I'm a medical marijuana user, and I still smoke fairly avidly, just about every day. But, realizing how that is for me is like, I have to have a more perpetual balance, because this substance is a psychoactive, and it still is providing a stimulant that either takes me away or takes me towards different things. It still is altering your decision making, and even if it's not a significant thing, you're still taking yourself out of stasis, out of homeostasis. And good or bad, that is still stimulating you and still enacting chemical reactions in the brain. And when you start doing things that do that, then you also can lie to yourself about the stimulant in itself and how good it actually is or is not. And there's a big difference between medicine and the same can be said for food and sugar, to be fair, but that's like more obviously detrimental. And I think the only real case where this becomes vocational or interpretational to talk about is things that are more clearly like good for people, that like we have the studies like this is good. Like if you look at the study of, the shit food that everybody can be eating and meat, then I mean, it's pretty clear scientifically that stuff is just not good for you. And being able to say at that point, if you are or not addicted to something, if you're addicted to sugar, you're addicted to bread, then you're addicted to sugar, you're addicted to meat, you're probably addicted to, and not even just like, once again, the taste of things. And it's just knowing what your stimulants are. Why are you feeling stimulated? Why do you enjoy going back to some of the things that you do? It's because you are enjoying the stimulant. And there's a reason why we have a dopamine receptor in the brain. It's not like this is non-inherent to the cohesiveness of your existence, but it also is still extremely imperative at the same time that you understand, like, well, is this really helping me or is it really hurting me? Is this like something that's going to be continuously productive for my mentality and like my day-to-day life? And maybe that can change sometimes for some people and maybe it doesn't, right? There's a big difference. And depending on who you are, like, can depend on like what strand that there's so many factors that go into this. I think it's just important still to reconcile with the basis that stimulation has to be we have to be aware of our stimulants and the stimulation itself. And me prosing the long tangent anyway on like, how marijuana affects me is still just, it's obviously not the same, and it never will be the same to other people. And that's not really what I'm trying to prose. It's just more that like when you're taking a stimulant in any way, it's still altering you. And it is still giving you something that you're relying on. And then we start talking about dependency depending on how much you do it. And I mean then this barrel starts to go for a lot of different things like nicotine, and it's just like, but when you talk about those other things that are clearly not good for you, like, I mean, at that point it's just kind of like, how honest are you about what's actually hurting or helping you? Because there are some stimulants that, help you. We can talk about that at the same time, like being stimulated by a hobby that you enjoy, by making music, for me, for instance, right? Like that's non-invasive. It's not hurting anybody. It doesn't take me inducing something into myself as a stimulant. And if anything, it's taking muscle memory and it's taking many different things. So it's not just like me being able to say that my stimulant is not good. And I mean, tit for tat to some degree, but when we start altering our state of consciousness, when we start altering chemicals in the brain, and I mean, it's a really definitive line too. It's like, well, then technically if like I'm going to sing and I know that that's going to release chemicals in the brain, is that like, what is that going to do to me? Is the stimulant of like playing video games going to be, where is that level? And there's even a measurable level on like comparable what chemicals those things release to the brain. Like Andrew Huberman is a very good resource for this. He just talks about like video games give you a dopamine spike that's equivalent to fucking cocaine. And it's just like, that's just pure medical study. So it's like, well then, are you going to look at video games the same? Are you going to realize the stimulation that it has unless you are using that stimulant for a productive purpose? Is it really productive at that point? Right? And where's the definitive on what we say is real and what's not real on how this is actually affecting anybody? Because we normalize stimulants that obviously are not as productive for people. I mean, TikTok and social media is one of them. And it has its upsides, but I think the larger downside is that it's very clearly shifted the distinction on people's psychology and their psyche overall. Like when you have something that is literally psychologically painting the forwardness on how it manipulates people, and there's full proof of that, it's like, how are we still saying that this is okay? And if it is okay, then like where do we draw the line? And next, I guess, goes to this, finding the study on the stimulation that you're getting from TikTok. What dopamine equivalent is that to? Because if that's equivalent, you know what I mean? And then like, are we going to take that and we're going to actually run with it as if like that matters? And that's a real hard line to walk through in the middle, because you really don't know, like. And I mean, I guess it starts to go off of like what everybody wants to believe. But, we can put the evidence in front of people very distinctly on what something does or does not do. And are people going to listen? And I mean, that's why we have to think about like the stimulants themselves, because like we literally normalize and we distinctize out stimulants, and we don't give a second thought of how like detrimental it is to our psyche, or how evolutionarily changing it is. And are we just going to sit here and be okay with that? Like if people sit here and they knew what some of the food is doing to them inside of their body and they had the proof, like would they reason with that at a point where they're going to do something differently? And I think that that's kind of the point where I look at the whole stimulants and stimulation and having the conversation is like, are we already too far gone for the conversation about stimulants to be remotely relevant anyway? Like, Because if everyone's already so stimulated and everyone's so used to being so stimulated, it's like taking the video games away from all the people that play video games and knowing how their dopamine spikes is none of those people are going to be okay by the time that they try to go do other things, because they're so used to the stimulation that they have that, I mean, let's be real. What step is that going to have to take to be able to reset people's brains and not have a whole fucking mental health crisis and a meltdown? It's like if you took away alcohol and you banned alcohol, people are still going to try to find alcohol. There's alcoholics everywhere, but like now you have a different shifted dynamic. These, if you start criminalizing that, you're looking at something completely different. But like, where's the tit for tat? And it's so, unfortunately, as much as I really hope that we can move past this ideology of being stimulated all the time, if you feel like you're having any hard time moving forward with anything in your existence, then that's probably the time for you to remember to check your stimulants and to really understand if those stimulants are good for you or not. Because from your basic stimulants to your progressive stimulants, every single thing that you have that stimulates you, from non-invasive to invasive things to whatever it is, everything has an energetic exchange. It has a drawback, or it has you're getting a repercussive out of it. And so it's just, like, once again, your food, is that truly productive for you right now? Is it helping you? Do you, are you feeling like you have a lack of energy and all these other things? Well, maybe that's saying that, well, what's your energy source? What's your food? Like, you have to ask all those questions, and then maybe we can start getting answers. And if you really want to understand things and not be enslaved, then you have to ask the question, well, what is this doing to me? What is it doing for me? Is this productive for me, like, truly? And am I being honest with how it is? Because I'm just like, am I being real with saying that this is providing enough value to me to do this or this or that? And just back to the marijuana topic, is like, there are some people that live in chronic pain and other things like that. And like, so like the medicine is not the problem. The part is that when we over recreationalize something outside of its medicinal purposes and then just lean on saying it's for medicinal purposes, when like, I'm not going to be able to sit here and actually tell you that I'm just only smoking weed for medicinal purposes, because then I would only be using it every so often. I don't have like complete chronic pain. I'm not. And I know plenty of people that in the same area, like, they just have their card because they want to smoke. Like, they want to smoke because they just want to smoke. They're not, but everyone will sit here and say it's for the medical reasons. But like, Oklahoma has a full corrupt medicinal system because they'll just give anybody a card. And I'll call that out because, like, legitimately, that's not really medical. It's just a system itself that, and me saying this doesn't mean that they're going to change it. Every state has its own way that it sets its stuff up, and it's a part of making the state money. And that's kind of one thing, is like, your stimulants are a big part of how they're making money in this world off of people. And that's why you have to check them, because marijuana is still an expense. Like, all these things are still expenses, and including your food. And so it's like, if you're feeling stimulated to the point where you feel like you have to eat more often, then like, you're feeling some type of like way that you probably are not supposed to be feeling, but it's just your stimulation and the stimulant that is like completely putting you in a different position. And then we get so lost in them, we normalize them, and then we forget, maybe if I'm feeling, for instance, anxious or depressed, or I'm having a problem with my body, like, maybe the solution is way more than just like numbing myself with all these other things, and also then lying about how it's placeboing myself out, because there's probably plenty of people that could say they need a substance, and I will agree with that. But there are also multiple people on this planet that will say they need a substance and they don't actually need the substance. every single day. Maybe they need it every so often, but it's like, what are you defining as medicine for people and what are you not? And well, then at that point, I can't help anybody, but I can ask the question, well, what is your definitive goal by taking this exact substance? Because your answer to that is going to be a very clear, distinct replication of saying, and in the honest, most point of view, you are doing this because you just want to, or you have something that's not really justifiable outside of your own personal wants. And well, at that point, it's cool that you want it and it's cool, whatever, but this is something that's still stimulating you. And these things are still stimulating people. And that stimulation is just, once again, something that is still creating a toxic culture that we normalize. And by toxic culture, meaning that, like, what if we normalized it more to a point where if we had, like, most people don't have the knowledge about strands. I myself hardly have the knowledge about marijuana strands, but what if we really prioritize the medical side of it much, much more, even from a person-to-person point? And if I needed to smoke every day for some reason, for whatever reason, then like it becomes so much more practical for me to be doing it, or to attempt to involve myself with stimulation within this substance, or stimulation in general. So, and that's something I need to take imperative point too. That's, this conversation, half the conversations I have are also like me almost in the air talking to myself on like, what I have to continue to progress with. I'm a human just like the rest of you listening, or per se, I'm in a human body here with everyone else, and underneath a multi-dimensional facet, I'm also subject to making mistakes and misinterpretations and many other things that I still also have to get correctly on my own end, or have to learn from, because we all have to learn and we're all learning. So, but it's important to bring these things to the forefront of your mind. Like, well, ask yourself, what stimulates you just overall, and is it good for you? And most of what you probably could point out is not going to be good for us, because it's so normalized on what is and what is not good for us anyway. Like, just being completely honest. And when I say what's good for you or what's not good for you is something that like stimulates you to waste your time. So if I smoke and I'm not going to be productive, and by productive, I mean like I'm just kind of not able to do very much, and I'm like really high, and I'm just like, and you can vibe and chill out, and there's things okay for that, for like every so often discipline and whatever else, you know what I mean? But like, if that's just like the default normal, and like, sure, if someone's got their bag and that's how they want to spend their life, then like obviously do that. But where do you want to be at spiritually then is just going to be my question. Where do you actually want to be at inside of your head? And if you're happy with where you're at, then that's cool. But I think that the talk of the stimulants is obviously directed towards those who are stimulated or overstimulated, they feel like, or are taking a lot of stimulants on their day-to-day life without even realizing that everything is stimulating you, and that includes your phone, because your phone is the whole facet of stimulation. And for most people, that's what's going on, is they're getting stimulated via their phone. And every time that you touch it, it's the same thing as you going and eating. You're still getting dopamine. I think we just have to keep all of this in mind, no matter what it is. And if you feel like you're having any type of problem in your existence, then you have to step away from your stimulants. You have to discipline yourself away from stimulants, and it's hard. It is very difficult, but then you have to ask yourself once again, what do you want in this life? What do you want to feel? How do you want to feel every day? What are you going to take up? What's realistic to you? What's not? Whatever. And you have to build that repertoire with yourself. And if you really want it that bad, then the answers are always in front of you. And I myself have had to find a very definitive line with how I interact with different things, especially TikTok and social media and short form content and platforms and stuff. I've got sucked into it myself, and I just realize what things do to me, and I stop. And sometimes there's some things I don't necessarily stop on specifically, and it doesn't work like that, but I do my due diligence for the most part to take a step away from whatever is not giving me that progress. And like sometimes it's, once again, it's cool to take some time, chill out and whatever you want to do, but if you feel stuck or you feel like you're walking in circles, then it's probably your stimulants and you just have to check them. And everything is stimulation, including music. Sometimes we literally have to just set it all aside, take a break from the music, take a break from the stuff. And it's okay to do all that. Don't let people sit here and tell you that you just have to be so lost in the mix, lost in the sauce or whatever. Like, just no. You don't have to. It's a very hard game to play, and it's a very hard game to understand because your psychology is just like a game in itself, and that's why it's gamified by how people take advantage of it in our current day-to-day society. So it's just important to keep that in mind. This is the Miss Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening, supporting. If you want to check out me more everywhere else, my music or anything, Aeromiss.xyz, Aeromiss on all the platforms, you know what it is. And some of these topics, I could do 2-hour long conversations, but I think throwing it out there and then getting the feedback and then going off of more people's expansions that they might have for some of these topics can be really great. So we're going to start here. I'm going to try to keep a lot of these under 30 minutes, and we'll just kind of round out through and keep going, because the conversation can change. Any conversation can change. And unless the conversation is going between people, which after I get through with all of these solo ones, I am going to start integrating, bringing people onto the podcast, and we're going to start doing some cool stuff with that. So thank you so much. Stay tuned, and I'll catch you in the next one.